So far, we have covered financial statement analysis. What are 8 different angles from which we need to look at? We need to do the financial statement analysis of an organization, and those 8 steps are number one, profitability and performance; number two, liquidity; number three, solvency; number 4, efficiency in utilization of fixed assets; number 5, efficiency and effectiveness in working capital management; number 6, financial leverage; number 7, valuation ratios; and number 8 is the EVA, that is the real profit. That is the real profit. EVA is economic value added. EVA is economic value added. And how do we arrive at the figure of economic value added? Would you like to mention, sir? Prasanna sir, would you like to add as to how to arrive at the figure of EVA?
Yeah. Um, yeah. Economic value added.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever thinking I have understood
Mm-hmm.
is see, one is this. It is beyond the financial number,
Right.
right? In terms of value addition,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and it is besides the financial ratios and the percentages and the growth rates that we are looking at.
Okay. Okay.
This is my limited understanding.
No, 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 it's perfectly fine. It's perfectly fine. So we will understand, and I'm sure when we discuss about the economic value added, you will be pleasantly surprised that such a wonderful key performance indicator which is available in the domain of finance, and it is not used so much by we people. Otherwise, globally, the corporates all over the world use the KPI of economic value added very extensively for the purpose of determining bonuses of the top management of the companies. Not only for determining bonuses of the top managements of the companies, EVA is also a factor that drives the market price of companies' stocks on the stock exchanges as well. And that is what we will cover in any case as part of this session, which is on financial statement analysis. We have looked at the profitability performance from the perspective of sales, and then we have looked at it from the perspective of people who provide the capital, and then we have also looked at from the perspective of the asset utilization. This is what we have done already. Then we looked at liquidity ratio, and as part of the liquidity ratio, we understood the current ratio, and we also understood the quick ratio. That helps us understand as to how is the capability of the business in being able to discharge its short-term obligations. Then we discussed solvency, and we understood solvency, that is, if the total of all the assets of a business are more than the total liabilities, that means that business is solvent. But if the total assets of a business are less than the amount of total liabilities, that means that business is not solvent. Now, this definition that we discussed yesterday is from the perspective, it is a historical calculation of solvency. Now, if we have to look at the solvency from the future perspective, we will calculate a ratio which is known as DSCR, and that is debt service coverage ratio. And how do we calculate the debt service coverage ratio? So in the numerator, first we will take the profit after tax, and then we will add all the non-cash expenses. So when I say non-cash expenses, what do I mean? I mean is the depreciation and the amortization, because depreciation and amortization are the non-cash expenses. That means even though they hit our P&L, but there is no outflow of cash on account of depreciation and amortization. So we take the profit after tax plus the non cash expenses, plus we also add interest on the term loans, interest on the term loan, and then we divide this amount by the total of interest, because that is what we have to pay every year, plus installment loan repayment installments. So any term loan that we may have taken, that is what that amount we will take in the bottom, and that is loan repayment installments. And of course all these figures are figure for the year as a whole, यानी कि ये जो फिगर्स हैं वो सारे के सारे पूरे साल के लिए हैं. यानी कि इंटरेस्ट का जो अमाउंट है, ये जो यहाँ हम बात कर रहे हैं, वो पूरे साल का इंटरेस्ट है ऑन दी लॉन्ग टर्म लाइबिलिटीज़, लॉन्ग टर्म लोन्स. ये जो लोन रीपेमेंट इंस्टॉलमेंट जो हम बात कर रहे हैं, दैट मीन्स the EMIs which are to be paid in respect of the term loans that we may have taken. This will give us a ratio which is known as DSCR, and that is debt service coverage ratio. And typically from the perspective of the lenders, so अगर आप किसी बैंक के पास में जाएंगे या फाइनेंशियल इंस्टीट्यूशन के पास में जाएंगे, तो they expect the DSCR to be more than 1.5. So long as the DSCR, and this DSCR, so long as it is more than 1.5, banks and the financial institutions are happy about it. So this is a ratio that gives you idea about the solvency of a business from the future perspective. You can also calculate another ratio for the solvency analysis, and that is ISCR, interest service coverage ratio. And how do we calculate interest service coverage ratio? We take the EBITDA in the numerator. So we take EBITDA in the numerator and we divided it by the amount of interest. And here the interest that you will take is going to be the total interest on the bank finance as well as interest on the long-term finance or the project finance. So this will give you an idea as to how is the solvency or how is the capability of the business for servicing the debt which the company may have taken. So these are the two ratios, DSCR and ISCR, that you can calculate so as to determine as to how is the future solvency of a business. Now we come to the fourth aspect, and the fourth aspect is efficiency in utilization of fixed asset. That means how efficient the business is in using its assets. We understand it very clearly कि जितना कोई कंपनी अपनी एसेट्स को अच्छी तरह से इस्तेमाल करेगी, उतना ज़्यादा वो कंपनी टर्नओवर जनरेट कर सकेगी, उतनी ज़्यादा रेवेन्यू जनरेट कर सकेगी. और कोई कंपनी जितना ज़्यादा रेवेन्यू जनरेट करेगी, जितना ज़्यादा टर्नओवर जनरेट करेगी, चांसेस ये हैं कि उतना ज़्यादा वो कंपनी प्रॉफिट कमाएगी. And so that is how ability of a business in using the fixed assets efficiently is very, very important for a business to give a very, very good and very attractive performance. So जितना किसी कंपनी की efficiency in using the assets ज़्यादा होगी, so much better that company is going to be. And obviously so much better is going to be the profitability of the company, and if the profitability of the company is going to be good, that means valuations of this company are also going to be good. Now let's understand how to calculate the efficiency ratio. Now please remember, these efficiency ratios are also known as activity ratio. They are also known as turnover ratio, and I'm sure you can understand as to why are they called as activity ratio, because what you are trying to measure, you're trying to measure as to how the assets have been used for generating more turnover. Turnover means activity, and that is how it is also known as activity ratio, and it is generating turnover, so it is obviously also known as turnover ratio. I'm telling you all this because sometimes you can get a question in the exam, and that's where they might, instead of using the efficiency ratio, they might use the word activity ratio, or they might use the word turnover ratio, and that time you should not have any confusion. So how do we determine efficiency of a business? Let's take a small example. there is a company A and there is company B. कंपनी ए का सेल्स 1000 है और कंपनी बी का सेल्स 2000 है. कंपनी ए की एसेट्स 100 हैं और कंपनी बी की एसेट्स 200 हैं. तो अगर हम जनरली प्राइमा फेसी देखें तो हमारी एक टेंडेंसी होती है कि अगर हमसे कोई पूछे कि भाई कंपनी ए और बी में कौन सी कंपनी अच्छी है, तो चांसेस ये होते हैं कि हम बोलेंगे कि कंपनी बी अच्छी है. और हम क्यों बोलेंगे कंपनी बी अच्छी है? क्योंकि टर्नओवर ऑफ कंपनी बी इज़ 2000, टर्नओवर ऑफ कंपनी ए इज़ 1000, turnover of company B is twice the turnover of company A, and that is why instinctively we tend to give an answer that the company B is better. But we do not have to look at the turnover in isolation. What we need to do, we need to look at the turnover of the company in conjunction with the fixed assets of the company. And so fixed assets of company A are 100, fixed assets of company B are 300. Now what we do, now we calculate a ratio which is known as assets turnover ratio. So when we calculate assets turnover ratio, what do we realize? We realize company A is turning its assets around 10 times. That means company is able to generate 10 times turnover of the amount of the assets this company is having. Whereas the same ratio for company B is 6.67. So obviously the company which is able to turn its assets around more often is more efficient a company than the company which is not able to turn it around that often. So this is how we calculate the efficiency ratios. Now there are many variants of efficiency ratio. So what we can do, we can calculate a ratio saying sales divided by non-current assets or fixed assets or long-term assets. So you call them non-current assets, which is as per the Indes terminology, or as per the old Indian GAAP, you would call them long-term assets or you will call them as fixed assets. So we can calculate this efficiency ratio. Number one, sales divided by non-current assets. Number two, sales divided by the current assets. And number three, sales divided by the total assets. And when we calculate these ratios will give an idea as to how efficiently the company is doing. Now, the question can come to your mind as we discussed yesterday, how to figure out कि company की efficiency कैसी है. And that is where I would like to draw your attention to the discussion that we had yesterday. And the discussion that we had yesterday कि अगर मुझे मालूम करना है कि ये साल मेरी कंपनी की परफॉर्मेंस कैसी है, with the help of these ratios, what will I do? I will calculate, I will compare my ratios with my competitors' ratios. I will compare my ratios with the industry norms, or I will calculate my ratio with my last year's number, or I will compare my ratios with my budgeted number, and that will give me an idea as to how am I doing as far as the efficiency is concerned. I am doing better or I am doing worse. So if I am doing better, I have an encouragement and motivation to do even better. And if I am doing worse, then of course I need to sit with the management of my company and work out a strategy so as to ensure that efficiency of our business should be as high as possible, because ultimately the performance of the company is going to depend on the efficiency with which this company uses its fixed assets. So that's your efficiency ratio. Now, not only we look at the efficiency of the fixed assets, but we also look at the efficiency in the working capital management. जैसा कि हम कल डिस्कस कर रहे थे कि पूरी दुनिया में रिसर्च बताती है कि 90% ऑफ द टाइम्स जब कोई कंपनी बंद होती है तो उसका मेन कारण होता है उस कंपनी का बैड वर्किंग कैपिटल मैनेजमेंट. तो ये बहुत ज़रूरी है किसी भी बिजनेस के लिए कि उसका वर्किंग कैपिटल मैनेजमेंट जितना टाइट हो उतना अच्छा है. दैट मीन्स इन्वेंट्रीज जितने कम हो उतना अच्छा है, रिसीवेबल्स जितने कम हो उतना अच्छा है, कैश एंड बैंक बैलेंस जितना कम रख के काम चला सकते हैं उतना अच्छा है. So that is your efficiency and effectiveness in working capital management. Now, how do we calculate? How do we find out efficiency in working capital management? So number one, we can calculate a ratio which is known as inventory turnover ratio. How do we calculate this ratio? Sales divided by total inventories. This gives us an idea as to how efficiently our inventories are getting turned around. Another ratio that we calculate is sales turnover to the sales divided by receivables, and this gives us an idea as to how frequently we are able to turn our receivables around. Third ratio is payable turnover ratio, And how do we calculate payable turnover ratio? We take the cost of goods sold in the numerator and take the payables in the denominator, and this is what gives us our payable turnover ratio. और मैं आपको बताऊं कि अपना जो इन्वेंट्री टर्नओवर रेशियो है जितना ज़्यादा हो उतना अच्छा है. अपना जो रिसीवेबल टर्नओवर रेशियो है वो जितना ज़्यादा हो उतना अच्छा है. लेकिन अपना पेबल जो रेशियो है, पेबल टर्नओवर रेशियो है, वो जितना कम हो उतना अच्छा है. राइट, जितना कम हो उतना अच्छा है. दैट मीन्स व्हाट? दैट मीन्स वी शुड ट्राई एंड यूज more of the creditors and the current liabilities for funding our working capital rather than using borrowed funds or our own capital. The fourth ratio that we can calculate for evaluating efficiency in working capital management is OWC turnover ratio. So what is OWC? OWC is operating working capital. And how do we find the operating working capital? We find the operating working capital by taking the total of inventories and add the figure of receivables and minus the figure of payable, and this will give us our ऑपरेटिंग वर्किंग कैपिटल. और ऑपरेटिंग वर्किंग कैपिटल का मतलब क्या है कि वो वर्किंग कैपिटल जो कि डायरेक्टली ऑपरेशंस में यूज हो रही है. सो वी कैन ऑल्सो कैलकुलेट दी OWC टर्नओवर रेशियो, सेल्स डिवाइड बाय OWC, and this will give us an idea as to how efficiently we are using our operating working capital for giving how efficiently we are using it. Number 5, we also calculate the current ratio, and current ratio, as we discussed in the context of liquidity, current ratio is current assets divided by current liabilities. Now here, friends, I would like to mention that normally it is thought that किसी भी कंपनी का करंट रेशो जितना ज़्यादा हो उतना अच्छा है. तो मैं आपको क्लियर कर दूं कि ये जो अंडरस्टैंडिंग है वो बहुत गलत है, क्योंकि किसी भी कंपनी का करंट रेशो कब ज़्यादा होगा? किसी भी कंपनी का करंट रेशो उस हालत में ज़्यादा होगा जब उसकी इन्वेंट्रीज बहुत ज़्यादा हैं, उसके रिसीवेबल्स बहुत ज़्यादा हैं, उसका कैश ऑन बैंक बैलेंस बहुत ज़्यादा है और उसके पेबल्स कम हैं. तब उसका कंपनी का करंट रेशो ज़्यादा होगा. इज इट ए गुड साइन? एन आंसर इज नो. वाई इट इज़ नॉट ए गुड साइन? बिकॉज एज अ बिजनेस वी हैव टू एंश्योर that we keep our inventory as low as possible. We keep our receivables as low as possible, and we keep our payable as high as possible. Now this is what should drive us as far as the working capital management is concerned. And therefore, as the working professional or as the practicing professional, whenever we have to advise our companies or whenever we have to advise our clients, we need to tell them, please work to reduce your current assets and not to increase it. Because if you increase your current ratio, you increase your bank borrowing. If you increase your bank borrowing, you increase your interest cost. You increase your interest cost, you hit your profitability. So these are the 5 ratios, friends, that we will calculate for evaluating efficiency in the management of working capital of a business.